Hollow Creek was not always empty. Once, it had been alive with the sounds of life. A town nestled between thick forests and rolling hills, full of laughter, chatter, and the clatter of daily business. But something had happened decades ago, something unspoken yet remembered in whispers by the few who lived nearby. On a certain night, the lights went out forever, and everyone vanished. Those who dared to ask questions were met with silence or trembling fear. People simply stopped speaking about it. The town became a warning, a shadowed memory etched in the minds of the curious. Claire had always been drawn to abandoned places. She was a seeker, fascinated by what remained after life moved on. And the story of Hollow Creek called to her in a way she could not resist. She arrived on a late autumn afternoon, the sky bleeding orange and gray. The trees around the outskirts of the town twisted unnaturally, their skeletal branches scraping against each other in the wind. The moment she crossed the threshold, the air changed. It became heavy, thick with anticipation, and unnervingly still. At first, it seemed like any abandoned town, buildings leaning and crumbling, signs faded and hanging precariously, streets cracked and overgrown with weeds. But the shadows moved differently. They lingered longer than they should, stretching in ways the sun could not explain. Windows reflected shapes that should not exist, and Claire's own reflection sometimes blinked when she did not. Her footsteps echoed unnaturally, bouncing across buildings, stretching farther than they should. The town seemed larger than the map indicated, streets looping back, bending and twisting as though the land itself were alive. She wandered deeper, past what had once been a grocery store, a pharmacy, and a small diner. Everything was frozen in time. Shelves still bore remnants of food long rotted, newspapers crumpled on the floor, dated decades back, chairs overturned as though dropped in haste. And yet, the air smelled metallic and sweet, like rusted blood. Whispers rose faintly, brushing her ears, calling her name, and she knew, without understanding how, that the town was aware of her presence. Inside the diner, the room seemed ordinary at first glance, but the shadows were restless. The ceiling flickered with movement, black shapes slithering across peeling wallpaper. The floorboards groaned as if something heavy paced beneath them. Claire felt watched from every angle. Names were etched into the walls, layered upon one another like veins in the wood, pulsing faintly, each mark a memory, each scratch a prisoner of Hollow Creek. Time lost all meaning. Hours, or was it days, passed. Streets she walked looped endlessly, bringing her back to the same diner, the same whispers. The windows no longer reflected her properly. Her face stretched, eyes sunken, features twisted, and when she moved, the reflection lagged, mimicking her in imperfect delays. Shadows in corners writhed as though alive, fingers reaching toward her heels, trailing her wherever she went. Every door she opened led to rooms that were similar, yet subtly different, each echoing the last visitor's panic. As night fell, the town revealed itself fully. Hollow Creek was not dead. It was awake. Every abandoned building held remnants of those who had vanished before. Their faces appeared in broken mirrors and shards of glass, hollow eyes screaming silently, reaching out with desperate fingers. The shadows on the street grew longer, black tendrils moving independently, curling and twisting toward her with a sentient hunger. The wind whispered names, her name, and those she had never heard, each syllable curling like smoke into her mind. Claire began to feel her thoughts slipping. Memories not her own invaded her mind, moments of fear, terror, and helplessness. She saw flashes of people walking into the town, cheerful at first, then panicked, screaming as the streets twisted around them, swallowing them into impossible angles and looping alleyways. Hollow Creek consumed them slowly, bending reality until no one could escape. And she realized with horror that the town itself was conscious. It was hungry, patient, eternal. She tried to leave, running down streets that should have led out, but every turn brought her back to the diner, the grocery store, the church, always the same, yet subtly distorted. Statues in the square moved their heads slightly when she passed. Windows now showed glimpses of people she had never met, trapped behind glass, mouths moving in silent screams, eyes following her. The air became thick, difficult to breathe, and every heartbeat echoed as if the town had taken control of her senses. By the third night, exhaustion set in. Claire could barely tell if she was awake or dreaming. Shadows climbed walls like living ink, pooling at her feet, stretching toward her. She heard whispers of promises and threats, urging her to stay, warning her not to leave. And in the center of the town, she discovered the origin. The church. It had been preserved, immaculate despite the decay around it. Inside, rows of pews faced a pulpit that pulsed faintly with a dark, rhythmic life. Figures, humanoid but grotesque, stood silently in the pews, some missing faces, some stretched unnaturally, their eyes tracking her every move. Claire realized too late that Hollow Creek was a trap designed not just to scare, but to claim. She tried to run, but the streets elongated impossibly, buildings stretching, folding, twisting. The ground beneath her rippled like liquid stone. Voices rose, layering upon one another, chanting names, hers included, louder and louder, until her thoughts became incoherent. She saw shadows stretching upward from the pavement, forming figures from previous victims, twisted versions of themselves. They reached for her, their blackened hands brushing her arms, whispering, pressing her into the street. The town pulled her toward the church automatically, as though drawn by invisible strings. Inside, the air was colder, denser, filled with a heavy silence that weighed on her mind. The pulpit's dark pulse seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat. From the corners, whispers swelled into voices, coherent now, repeating a single command: stay, become part of Hollow Creek, never leave, never leave. The pew's figures reached toward her, stretching, elongating, merging with the shadows that crawled along the walls. She felt herself being pulled, weightless, simultaneously stretched and compressed, losing all sense of self. Days or years passed. Claire's body was never found. Locals occasionally reported hearing her screams carried on the wind near Hollow Creek, and sometimes, wandering the roads near the forest, they glimpsed a pale figure standing motionless in the distance, her eyes hollow, watching, waiting, trapped in the town's eternal cycle. Hollow Creek had claimed her completely, as it had claimed all others, folding her into its endless streets, into its whispering shadows, into the pulse of a town that lived only to trap those who dared to enter. Now, anyone who enters Hollow Creek reports the same: streets bending impossibly, whispers calling your name, shadows crawling in corners, buildings freezing in impossible arrangements, reflections showing versions of yourself you do not recognize, and always, always, the feeling of being watched, followed, claimed. Hollow Creek does not forgive curiosity. It does not forget. It waits for the next person brave or foolish enough to cross its invisible threshold. And once you step inside, it begins to consume you, slowly, quietly, eternally. If this gave you chills, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more terrifying encounters.